we settled on putting compost into the system just to get it to fire up a little bit faster, because we soon realised that you couldn't wait 10 years to fix them. You'd go broke. The soils went from almost concrete that you could barely dig with a crowbar to paddocks that you'll see on this farm today where you can dig them with a spoon. Call it what you like. Call it climate resilience or just bloody good farming. What you're trying to do is eliminate the ups and downs, be more resilient in your farming system.
How can we prevent the deficiency in the first place rather than just always chasing our tail?
We want the soil there to be able to support life at any environmental change or weather patterns that are thrown at us.
G'day, I'm Craig Allen, and you're listening to the Healthy Soils Podcast, a series about compost and how it can help create healthy soils that then grow the food we eat in Australia. The purpose of this podcast series is to help make the connection between organic waste generation and food production, and to inspire you to think about what you can do when it comes to organic waste, including food waste and compost. On this journey, we've been talking with farmers, composters, and soil experts about the role we can all play in getting organic waste out of landfill and instead turned into compost. Because healthy soils produce healthy crops, which lead to healthy humans and animals. In this episode, we're turning to farmers to hear about their specific farm experiences with compost, why they use it, how they use it, and the impact it has on their operations. We start with Alan and Lucy at their farm in Dungog in the Hunter region of New South Wales. It's 91 hectares of farm where they raise cattle, sheep and chickens. They've been on a journey of transforming their farm's biodiversity and increasing their resilience, starting from the ground up.
So we're trying to increase the biodiversity on our farm and trying to make it so that the natural systems can work better, basically, so that we don't need to add more inputs. So we're trying to make the land better than what we started with.
I think everyone in the farming community really cares for the land in which they work. We try and minimise the use of chemical additions on our property, partly for economical reasons, but also for more ethical reasons as well. So one of the first points of call when we were starting with the farm was to look at how we could add biodiversity and add organic matter into the soil. And our automatic choice was to add compost, because it's a very visual way of adding biodiversity, adding organic matter to the soils physically. Soil samples that we had back from certain areas of the farm really showed that we had low organic matter. We were low in micronutrients and minerals that it was suggested that compost could help us with.
Basically, you get a soil test and it says you're deficient in this. And so your agronomist will say, well, add this. And really what we're trying to do is go, why are we deficient in this? Like, how can we prevent the deficiency in the first place rather than just always chasing our tail?
We were starting to learn about looking at things more holistically. It's actually lots of areas that you need to work with rather than trying to control. And compost was a really natural way of doing that. And we had access to some trials, and we were speaking to some people that could help us and advise us on how best to use that to try and prove it to ourselves to see if we were on the right track.
That's when Alan and Lucy started their experiment. They divided one of the paddocks into 3, putting fertiliser on one, commercial compost on the second, and the third paddock was the control, with nothing added to it. Here's Lucy.
The fertilised pasture grew a lot of grass, which is kind of what you expect. The following year, the compost and the fertiliser were pretty much on par. And then following that, we found that that area is doing better. What that's telling us is that beneath the ground, the natural system is starting to kick into gear, basically. And then the soil and the nutrients can look after themselves.
The compost trial was a really good way of introducing a little bit of a paradigm change of our thinking. In that initial year, we were looking at adding something to the soil to get better growth. And as we've learnt a bit more over the years, we're starting to understand that it's not about adding things necessarily is going to be the best way of us improving our practices.
So these things take time. You don't see the immediate response. You're really playing a long game with it. But if we can get all of those systems working naturally, then we build our resilience into the future. So we found that over the years that the compost area started to do better. If we've got microbiology that's producing the nutrient that the plant needs, then we don't need to be applying any fertiliser and things. It can look after itself.
We want the soil there to be able to support life at any environmental change or weather patterns that are thrown at us.
So if we've got a wide variety of things, we become more resilient. So we start from, like, you can have the macro level. So you've got your cows, your sheep, your wildlife, your trees, species. So having a diverse level of that is great. And then we go down to the smaller levels. So our grass species, we use multi-species pastures planting, which gives everything they've all got their own little niche that they fit into. So having multiple different species helps us be more resilient in that way. And then you go down to the micro level as well. So we've got what we want to promote is a vast array of microbiome as well beneath in the soil. So I see it as we don't have any control over the weather or the price of things or
The environment
in general. We don't have control over any of our neighbours or anything like that. I think diversity and resilience go hand in hand. So if you are diverse, you can, and again, at a big level, like if we have beef and the beef price crashes and we only have beef, then we're going to lose out, right? Whereas if we have beef and lamb, then we can support ourselves with lamb while beef is not doing so well. That sort of works as well with, the micro scale as well. So going back to soil biology, if you have a diverse, if you have diverse species of plants, so diverse biology underneath the soil, then if something isn't doing very well or you have a year where it's very dry, then you've got other things to rely on. Those other microbiome can make nutrients for you and hold water and do all of that. And then they'll proliferate in those sort of times. And then when it gets really wet, the opposite happens. But we've got that diversity that we can cope with all of the different things that nature throws at us.
And I think it's important to have it as, for me, the main focus of what we're doing is to make this property more resilient. Basically, it means that we can operate year round. Overall, your averages rise and rise and rise every year. Our holding capacity rises and rises every year, and we've got a really strong way of showing that our property is becoming more resilient against everything that is thrown at it. It's actually lots of areas that you need to work with rather than trying to control. And compost was a really natural way of doing that.
Alan and Lucy's pragmatic approach has resulted in a property that is as fruitful as it is resilient. They've put the work in and are seeing the benefits that compost brings. Over at Enever Farm near Forbes in New South Wales is Steve Nicholson, who's been farming canola, wheat, barley, merino sheep and sometimes cattle for over 23 years. The property has grown to over 9,000 acres across the entire operation in that time. In recent years, Steve's focused on building up soil carbon as a way to boost productivity. Their journey started by looking at their paddocks to see what they could do to increase their yield.
Fixing them is addressing what was fundamentally affecting production. Now, it could be anything, so you really need to do it on a farm by farm and right down to a paddock by paddock basis. We realised that it was soil health. They'd been farmed for probably 100 years, and a lot of that would have been just ploughed and ploughed and ploughed. So you had structural issues, you had low fertility issues, and those two things together means that, we know that it had virtually no soil organic matter in it at all. We did some early soil testing on some of these farms, and we had soil carbon organic matter levels of 0.01%. So you're basically talking dirt, like rock, nothing there in it. So once you know that, you can then start to say, well, how am I going to fix it? Now, you could fix it by just real good zero-till or minimum-till world best practice farming, stubble retention, do everything right. It's going to take an awful long time. We looked at what was available to speed that up, and we settled on putting compost into the system just to get it to fire up a little bit faster, get the benefits a little bit quicker, because we soon realised before that you couldn't wait 10 years to fix them. You'd go broke waiting for the production improvements that you were looking for. So we said, right, we'll do some trials like you should do. And we did some strip trials where we put different rates of compost. We had a look what it did. It did nothing at all in year one. And we went back to the literature and talked to people about it, and everybody who knew anything said the same thing, yeah, it won't work in 1 year. So we said, right, won't work in 1 year, let's, see what we can do about making it better. So we settled on having a crack, basically. We took a couple of paddocks, we put out 10 or 12 tonnes per hectare in year one, and then 10 and 12 tonnes per hectare in year two, continuing with our good farming practice. But we initially, you saw the benefit start. The paddocks were softer. They didn't tend to slate over like the sodic soils can do if it rains. It's slow, but you see it improve. So the easiest way, you also got to do the macro thing. So you won't fix the soil structure if it's acid. You won't get the plant growth, so you won't get the root biomass. You won't fix soil structure if it's sodic, if you don't put gypsum on. You've got to do those things. But once you've done those things, you've got to start to get the microbiology, the soil actually healthy and working, so that all the little creatures that live in the soil, from the big things like worms down to the small things like protozoas, all are doing their thing to help improve that soil structure and get that root biomass. Because what really improves soil structure is root biomass. So instead of having a little tiny bit of soil with a little piddly root system that falls over in the middle of spring, the root systems are bigger and more robust, feeding on a bigger area, and they improve the soil health. The soils went from almost concrete that you could barely dig with a crowbar to paddocks that you'll see on this farm today where you can dig them with a spoon. Like, they're soft and they're full of life and it works, but it takes time. Generally speaking, given enough time and enough tender loving care, they'll all improve. And then you get to the stage where we are now, where it's 99% of the paddocks are all beautiful. Quality is everything. I've said this so many times. You want a product that's a high quality because it's going to work faster and it's going to work better. As simple as that. High quality compost to us, when it arrives, when we have a good look at it, it's got to be almost like soil. It's got to have that real nice loamy texture to it. So it's been processed fully. There's no macro pieces left in it. It's really nice. It smells sweet.
Paddocks you can dig up with a spoon certainly evokes vivid imagery of soft, moist soil. But not every paddock is the same, and every property has its own variables. For Steve, his experience with seeing the benefits of high-quality compost has seen him turn his attention to the role soil carbon plays in the productivity of his farm.
What I will say to people is that there's a lot of stuff, a lot of technology, a lot of things you can do on a farm. Make sure what you adopt is adoptable for your system, your ambitions, your own abilities in your own environment. Soil carbon, that's the next big thing. That's the thing that I believe, will change agriculture completely. Soil carbon is the foundation on which all this future productivity will be based. So right from the very beginning, before we talked about soil carbon like we do today, we were looking at soil organic matter and looking at organic carbon. And we realised pretty quickly that we had virtually none left in our soils. And that was for a variety of reasons, but paddocks had been flogged for generations, ploughed and ploughed and ploughed and ploughed. We know that the carbon cycles, and we know that it's volatile. It's a labile form of carbon, but you need it. It's a building block, a foundational building block of all the rest of your soil health. Without adequate amounts of soil carbon and soil organic matter, the rest of the system won't work. The microbiology has nothing to really feed on and to propagate on. So we set about trying to improve that long before we had the technology we've got now by just simply farming good zero minimum till practices and monitoring it, soil testing it on a regular basis to see what was actually happening. And we did move that organic carbon levels quite dramatically. So we took paddocks from below 1%, so in the 0.0 somethings, to most of the paddocks by the mid-teens, like 2015, were sitting at between 1.4 and 1.8. So quite dramatic improvements. But you've got to really nurse them to do that. So we realised that's what was driving the other rest of the improvements. I've seen so many failures, including our own, in those early years when we first started using compost. Our first compost trials, no appreciable result whatsoever, made no difference. And when in hindsight, we now know why. Because what are you doing? You're putting 10 or 12 or 15 tonnes or 20 tonnes or 25 tonnes of compost on a paddock, which is hardly any, to try and overcome 100 years of very, very bad farming practices to it. It takes a lot more than that. What compost tends to do is just speed up the system. So you just go to zero till, really good farm management, stubble retention, protecting your ground cover, using cover crops, you'll get it to move. You'll get the soils to improve and become healthier, but it just takes a lot longer than if you start injecting compost into the system, putting it in to help fire it up faster. So call it what you like, call it climate resilience or just bloody good farming. What you're trying to do is eliminate the ups and downs so much. Be more resilient in your farming system.
Avocado toast is a staple cafe dish these days, with the buttery soft fruit a favourite in salads everywhere. Will and Georgie grow Maluma avocados at Spring Valley Avocados in the New South Wales Hunter Valley. After following fertiliser regimes for a while, they started thinking about whether there was another way. That's when they started getting deeper into compost, including making it themselves. Will talks about what's been happening on his farm over the last couple of years.
I've probably got into compost in the last 18 months, just going through the journey of using synthetic fertilisers and trying to find a more balanced solution for soil health. So we really wanted to focus on the mulch and the compost, because with the avocado trees in particular, all the feeder roots come out of the soil and into the mulch and compost on top. So that organic matter layer on top is so critical to the health of those trees. And especially after the couple of wet years that we had, you can see we put a really good layer of mulch and compost on there, and you can see the trees respond. They're a lot more lower disease, better looking. And I guess that was probably a couple of years ago, and then we've just gone into making it ourselves and moving a lot more in that path. So initially when we started the project, we were focusing on the minerals side of things, trying to target specific trace elements in the trees, which is fine, like a lot of calcium, urea, boron, those elements in particular. But the further we moved down and went into compost, the great thing about the compost is you get a product that encompasses all three. So you get the varied minerals within the compost, you get the biology, and then you get the humates within that product. So it's just a versatile product. Before we were using compost, we were using a lot of herbicide underneath the tree to keep all the weeds and stuff down. And then we transitioned to compost and mulch, and within a year you could see the effects. I mean, we really wanted to focus on the soil biology, that with the vision that better soil biology makes a healthier tree. And you could see that, and we wanted to, I guess, hedge against droughts and floods and everything like that. And you can see it evident now that when we've got that compost and mulch layer on the soil, the roots are a lot healthier. the leaves are a lot glossier and greener. We need a couple of 100 cubic metres to put out on our orchard. I found some waste facilities that had a byproduct of compost that they made, but we wanted a better product, so we decided to make it ourselves. So our first batch, we just used the front end loader. We just got some manure from a nearby dairy farm, and we got some round bales of hay, and we used our equipment that we put out mulch under the trees, and we just mixed it all together. So we are using what's called the spice compost method. It's a bit of a lower impact version of making compost. So instead of turning the product every day, we mix it all in together, we put water on it, and then we inoculate the pile with some beneficial microbes, and then we put a big tarp over the compost, and we'll leave that for a longer period of time. So it's more of an anaerobic method, but I guess it's lower input for us. And I mean, you'd like to think that you have all the time in the world to make this product, but in reality, you get busy doing other jobs. So if the compost can still be doing what it's doing, whilst you don't have to focus on it as much, well, then that's fine. So it's, I guess, a lot less energy intensive and a lot less labour intensive. You might only be turning it 3 times within its cycle, and you lose a lot less product. We've produced our first batch, and it's a really good product. It doesn't smell, it has good texture, it has a lot of insects and worms in it. It's just really full of life.
Will has been exploring other ways to use compost on their farm. There are some logistics to work out along the way, but he's finding a solution that works for them and for the size of their farm.
Other ways that we are focusing on at the moment is using compost extracts. So that's where we mix a certain portion of compost in with water, and then we'll take the compost out of the water, and then we'll apply that compost extract to the pastures. So I think it's a much more efficient way of getting the biology onto the pastures without having to put a couple of cubic metres or more per hectare. There's a lot of logistics involved in getting that compost out, and like obviously the price and material, everything goes into it. But if you can use a small portion of high quality compost, mix it in with water, and then apply that out using a foliar spray, well then you're getting that biology into the pastures at a very cheap price. Even if you are still using synthetic fertilisers or whatnot, if you can still be using that compost to put biology into the paddocks, you're a lot better off. It gets a bit hard, like the logistics around it. The other hard side of it too is getting the actual resources to make the compost, and every location is different. It all just depends, I guess, your location, what materials you have on access. In this local area, there's not a huge amount of bigger farmers trying to get large amounts of carbon and nitrogen sources. It's a bit of a challenge. It's just trying to find that balance between finding materials, and yes, if you've got access to good materials, or great, or if you've got something on farm like prunings or whatever it may be that you can use. Everyone's got different farms, different sizes. You know, you can be a small scale producer and you don't need the trucks and everything to bring all the hay and manure and stuff in the farm. You could just have a box trailer and whatnot, do a small patch in a corner somewhere, and you could use that as an extract to go put out in your farm. So you don't have to be at a big scale. I mean, you definitely, with the avocados, you get a really good product if you can put the compost out.
Whether it's an avocado farm like Will and Georgie's, or a huge mixed farm like Steve or Alan and Lucy's, it's clear the common ingredient to their success is compost. It's key to creating healthy soils that produce resilient and productive properties. And it doesn't have to be expensive. Like Will, making your own compost is possible. It's not just for facilities with large trucks and infrastructure. And that's the benefit of this podcast. It's a chance for you to hear from the farmers in the field sharing their experiences about what worked and what didn't. Thanks for listening to the Healthy Soils Podcast, a series about the wonders of compost. Be sure to subscribe or follow our show so you don't miss out on future episodes when we get down and dirty into compost and how it's changing our soils for the better. You can find more information about what we discussed in the show notes, or you can go to the website to find out more. I've been Craig Allen. See you next time.